Once this is buffered, I'm going to hit that X-ray A, Hayden.
All right, councillors, welcome. We are now live streaming to YouTube. Just get into a big screen so I can see everybody. So I'll declare the meeting open at 3 p.m. Buller District Council, full council meeting 27th of April 2022 via Zoom. So welcome everybody. We have one public forum item which has come through via email regarding it's in relation to the Waimangaroa water paper, and it's from Mr. Barry Lightbound. I think it's probably best I just read his email rather than paraphrase it, to be fair. So he would like to have appeared today in person, but it's previously mentioned his health issues mean he's unable to attend, and obviously with COVID he can't anyway. I understand that the water supply is to be discussed today, and we'd like to submit the following. This whole project has been a litany of unaffordable aspirations proposed by an army of unaffordable consultants and experts. We are left with a system that is no better than when we started, and an eye-watering amount of sunk costs. It would be interesting to know if these costs are still accruing. I wonder if we will reach 1 million before the madness stops. We have had wall-to-wall experts. Maybe now it's time to listen to the local knowledge. Council has had a very cost-effective proposal from Brian Mumm regarding the trunk main. I put forward an affordable point-of-use UV sterilisation system that would satisfy WHO requirements and avoid chlorination that the Waimangaroa people don't want. You will inevitably decide what you want, but please, no more consultants, no more grandiose unaffordable schemes, no more sunk costs, no more uncontested tenders. Listen to the people that you serve. That's from Barry and Sue Lightbound. So I offered to put that in as public forum today, given they couldn't be here in person. So we note that, and we will obviously respond or organise our response to Barry later after at the end of the meeting when we've discussed the agenda item that he's referring to. So we'll go for any apologies today. So I have one from Councillor Margaret Montgomery. Are there any other apologies to add? Everybody else is there. So can somebody move those apologies, please? Moved Councillor Sampson, seconded Councillor Howard. All those in favour? Any against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Right, we've dealt with apologies, public forum. Members' interests. Are there any items on today's agenda where members wish to disclose any financial or non-financial interest? Councillor Nah.
Sorry, just had to unmute. Yeah, I'll declare an interest in the West Trip item.
Public excluded item?
Yep, that's it.
Which is agenda item 13.
Yep.
How will you deal with that?
I'll be on mute and I won't comment.
Okay, thank you.
And or vote.
Yep, thank you. Any other conflicts anyone wishes to declare? No, thank you. Okay, I move that those conflicts be noted. Is there a seconder, please? Move Deputy Mayor Roach. All those in favour? Any against? That's carried. Thank you. Right, confirmation of the minutes. Agenda item 3. These are from the meeting of full council held 30th of March this year. Are there any items of correction required in those minutes, please? I'll go to Mr. Councillor Bowden and then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. It's we'll do with number 6 on page 14, and where you're stated as saying that Julie Christie's resignation came into effect when a replacement was found. I think there's just there's a grammar there that will come into effect when a replacement is found.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's correct. So first paragraph of item 6, page 14, should read resignation will come into effect. Yep. Thank you for that. Deputy Mayor Roach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of very minor things. Page 15, the chair of the joint committee is Hugh McMillan, not Macmillan. So take out the A. And page 23, the spelling of Ngāti Waiwai, there's a Waiwai hasn't been spelt correctly, just for amendment, please.
Thank you. Noted. Anything else, councillors? Somebody care to move them then with those minor corrections? Move Deputy Roach, seconded Councillor Weston. All those in favour? Any against? It's carried. Thank you. Unanimously. Okay, agenda item 4 is the council action point list. What's the one on there is okay, so yes, number 13 there, and it's scheduled for May. Nothing further to update on that?
Not at this stage. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll address it when we get to that paper.
Okay. Any other questions on the action point list? Okay, somebody move that be noted. Councillor Bowden, seconded Councillor Rutherford. Thank you. All those in favour? Any against? That's carried. Thank you. Okay. Agenda item 5 is the Waimangaroa water supply. There's a few recommendations there, but I might just go to the Duff to talk us through the progress and what stage and the steps we've gone through quickly just through from the tender to the workshop to what we are presented with today, please.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, just wish to acknowledge the work of the project team in developing this report led by Eric Tabor to essentially identify options for scenario 3, as you'll find in attachment A in particular, which is to do with allocation of the $900,000, which was a budget provision for a water treatment plant that council has since resolved not to proceed with at this time. So that's some detail related to scenario 3. And the other scenarios are worked through from the beginning of essentially do nothing further on Cons Creek upgrade in particular, and all the way through to a fully optimised and compliant plant. But again, noting that council have already resolved that a key element of that being the water treatment plant has been deferred. And I'd just like to draw attention straight to the draft recommendations, actually, number 2, that subject to rating implications which aren't provided in this report, so just noting that, but subject to rating implications that in tandem, council endorse the scenario 3 improved resilience, which is the $2.3 million raw water upgrade as the preferred next stage, and that maintains council's previous capital expenditure approval from August last year, and as well to endorse the resilience assessment developed by staff for the priority works as to what that 900,000 could be prioritised towards. So that's the basis of draft recommendation number 2. And then thirdly, or the third recommendation is then to seek the rating implications through a subsequent paper to be brought before council, so that that could be understood before any final decision. And that's the main message, actually. This isn't seeking a council resolution to proceed with any of the scenarios. It's really just a necessary step along the way towards that. Open to any questions or clarifications I can provide.
Thanks, Mike. And I guess the importance of this step is that it defines what components are included in the 2.3. So, in which case then the finance team are better equipped to calculate what the rates are, because obviously there's varying levels of OPEX associated with, and depreciation and what have you associated with the different components, like a treatment plant versus a length of pipe buried in the ground is quite a different scenario from a financial point of view. Thank you. Right, Councillor Rutherford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd encourage you not to place too much importance on the halo that seems to be around my head at the moment. It's just a natural occurrence rather than the real thing. My question, I take it that scenario 3, that is the recommended way forward, not being present at the community consultation meetings, I take it that this is loosely their preferred option, given that all the possible scenarios and the impact that the flooding had on and the cost overruns for the original one, in particular the treatment plant. Is it fair to say that this would pretty well meet the community's expectations, given that it's not the best outcome, but it seems to be the best way forward for us as a council?
Is that a question for Mike, Phil?
Well, it's a question for anyone who can answer it, really, who's been working with the Waimangaroa group in terms of recent meetings.
Yeah, I think what I could say is that the community have been very clear that Cons Creek was their preferred source. So this ticks that box. They have indicated they have no desire for chlorination. So this, from the community point of view, will tick that box. Affordability really is what recommendation 3 speaks to, where a subsequent paper will address the any options we have around maintaining affordability for the community. And I think the improved resilience is something we hear quite a bit of feedback, and maybe Eric wants to add, but we certainly hear some feedback around frustration around outages, network blowouts and such like. So this investment, which is largely talked about in the $900,000, is my understanding, seeks to address a substantial level of the performance issues that the network is seeing in terms of pipe failure and such like. So it ticks a number of the boxes from the community point of view, I would think. Eric, do you have anything to add around the resilience improvement, maybe?
Yeah, I think Mr. Chair. So in addition to that, I mean, you have covered most of the key elements that the community was, it was important to them. Cons Creek, affordability. There's some matters that this scenario will not address, and that's one of compliance. But as it looks at spending the best way forward on the 0.9 million alternative C water treatment plant allocation allowance, it was a deep and thorough process to look at the actual value for money in relation to providing a resilient pipeline. We also looked at storage and elements around that. But first and foremost, it's about improving the resilience aspect, of the pipeline down Cons Creek Road and in and around Waimangaroa reticulation. And it also looks at key elements of being able to start now, being able to get some runs on the board, and being able to put that, investment and infrastructure improvement in place.
Eric. I think it's fair to say too, and you might want to comment on that, Eric, before you mute yourself, is that the investment is largely no regrets. So if in outgoing years an alternative supply was mooted from somewhere we haven't yet discovered, then you know that there would be not much of the spend that would be potentially mothballed or lost.
Yeah, correct. And it's probably, you know, that is an important element, because options 1 through to 8 that were recommended within the staff report attached to this item do have elements that are not going to be wasted if, you know, some other alternative supplies come forward, and particularly elements around reticulation improvements. Naturally, there will be elements that lead into Cons Creek Road that, you know, may or may not be useful in the future, but, you know, elements around reticulation for Waimangaroa Township will always be helpful, you know, no matter what, you know, like alternative might present itself in the future.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Sampson, then Councillor Howard.
Yeah, well, basically everything that's been said, I agree with. It was talked at the Zoom meeting a lot about storage, but I sort of feel the resilience is probably better, the money's better spent with this resilience. But it's a couple of things that's been there before, and it's still bugging me one heck of a lot, is that, you know, we've got $445,000 in project delivery and allowances, close to $500,000 on a just over $2 million project, 20%. It's a huge amount to sort of have there. And considering that already 550 has been sunk into accrued costs, you should be pretty well sort of honed in on making sure that those actual costs are down.
Look to Mr. Duff, I think, on that one to explain what those project delivery costs cover as opposed to the sunk costs today.
I think we've heard them before, but I just think some belts need to be tightened for these people in Waimangaroa, because, you know, they're taking a fair few hits here, and are paid rates at the inflated price for the last 12 months with actually backward steps. And okay, all of that has been, some of that's been nature, but there's not been a lot of progress other than sunken costs. And I think now, I think, you know, things need to be tightened up a bit.
Okay. You want to provide an answer, Mr. Duff, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question. So it's just important to note, other than those accrued costs today, we make provision, we make allowances, if you like, for the necessary project delivery costs, which are real. So these are level of effort, time-based costs that are incurred in delivering the project. You'll also note we provide allowances for, if you like, contingency, or we call it estimate and event risk, you know, in all scenarios. And these are provisions to ensure that the estimated capital expenditure budgets that we put forward give consideration for what could happen in both of those elements. So these aren't, you know, these aren't committed costs so much as when we provide our estimates to council for approval, that we have a reasonable provision for both the project management and owners cost to deliver said project. And I think we've witnessed in this project, for example, the difficulties and challenges that come along. Not all of them were revealed from day one. And so I think it's prudent to make budget provision for those elements, including allowances for risk. So that's some commentary around why we put those figures in. Else to not have them in could actually lead to problems down the track.
I understand that, but if things do work out and belts can be tightened, it would be a lesser amount. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, affordability has been always an issue for that community in this scheme, just because the numbers around what needs to be invested there and the number of people connected to it just kind of don't add up, don't make it easy. So, and I think I would comment that although recommendation 3 is to look at, sorry, is it the one? around the recommendation 3 is to explore the funding options, opportunities and risks. It doesn't guarantee that council is going to be able to find a way to necessarily make that, to ease that burden, because it certainly will be a substantial one. Councillor Howard.
And just around the bit of the prioritisation around the 900k budget, I understand you're looking at defer item 2 to keep within the 900k, but I'm just wondering a little bit of feedback on it. And certainly some of the criteria are rated very high, and the fact that it's ranked number 2, and just you're only deferring it. So is it wise to be putting it off rather than increasing the budget? And 2, you're doing all that work on the reticulation around the town. How much more expensive is to go back and put in the backflow prevention compared to doing it at the time you're doing the reticulation?
I see. That may be an Eric question, I would say. Mr. De Boer.
Yes, and I'm happy to take that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just looking for my mute button. Councillor Howard is quite right. Item number 2 scored highly in backflow prevention in relation to, gaining compliance with the new drinking water standards or even elements of the drinking water standards that have always been in place. Backflow prevention provides security to the reticulation. There are, although, within the feeling of the project group in relation to resilience, actually, attaining resilience outcomes, the 0.9 million was better spent within the pipe work and the reticulation. On the second part of your question, in relation to backflow prevention installation post the fact that we're working in the reticulation, we will be looking very careful if we are, have further opportunities, to look at particular backflow locations. But generally, I would need to seek some advice from our contractor to see, what additional cost that is going to induce in the future. Noting that there are still many more costs to come in the future for a untreated supply like this. There are still elements of treatment that will still need to be attained, either in the near or distant future when the new entity takes over, and backflow prevention is no different to that.
Thanks, Mr. De Boer. Joe, Councillor Howard, does that cover your question? Thank you. Right, councillors. No other questions. It's quite a good paper. There's again, I think that item 2 is the water's not actually treated. I don't think there's much gain from backflow prevention or metering. Councillor Sampson, you put your hand up again.
Yeah, just when, this is all okay, we're agreeing, when would it start? Are there any hold-ups to see? You have mentioned in there, June, I think it was. Is that likely to be the case? That's almost an immediate start?
Mr. De Boer?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Sampson. There are challenging elements to some parts of the projects, and there are some parts of the projects that can start earlier than others. Examples of, areas where we are constrained is accessing past Cons Creek Road, past the actual, incision from the February flood through the road, if you will. That's waiting for the road owner to repair. So it stands to reason that any, physical civil site works past that point is going to be difficult to get going on until that piece of work is completed. However, there are obviously some reticulation and pipe replacements that can happen on this side of it. There are also elements of a historic nature that need to be resolved with Heritage New Zealand. You recall Alternative C in August of 2021 stripped out some of this pipe replacements. So the team now have to accelerate our conversations again with Heritage New Zealand to get the authority to modify, areas that are under heritage protection through that, and that may add some further, elements of work before we can get into the Cons Creek pipe replacement.
And will they add to the sunk costs or not?
Well, they'll add to the project delivery cost.
So that was going to be my question. So those elements are part of the reason. So there's some obvious unknowns there that are part of the reason for that project delivery cost that Mike described earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'm not seeing any other questions. The resolutions there are recommendations there are to note the report and to, subject to rating implications, endorse scenario 3, which is the improved resilience package $2.3 million raw water supply upgrade as the preferred next upgrade stage, maintaining its previous capital expenditure committed in August 2021. And B, we endorse staff resilience assessment and identified priority works, options 1 through 8, as the best use of the $900,000 budget provision included in the $2.3 million for scenario 3, quite a mouthful. And 3, that we request rating implications of scenario 3, improved resilience, be available for comparison in time for the 22-23 annual plan considerations, incorporating the action point from August 2021 to explore funding options, opportunities and risks. Right, I'm prepared to move 1 through 3. Unless someone would like me to take them individually, I'm happy to do it that way. I think they all flow nicely together. Do I have a seconder, please? Seconded, Councillor Sampson. Is there any other discussion required on this? And understands the recommendations? Okay, all those in favour? Any against? Okay, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. We look forward to the next report around the rating implications. Okay, agenda item 6 is the flood recovery action plan update. Rachel, would you like to talk us through any of this?
Thank you,
Please.
Mr. Mayor. Councillors will recall that in August last year, we presented to you a draft recovery action program following the July flood events. It had always been the intention of the recovery team early this year to present an updated program to council, noting that this document is iterative and would move and shift as the recovery progressed. Back in January, we were looking to report on some excellent progress towards meeting the actions outlined in the program and start to outline to council and the community what an exit strategy from recovery back to business as usual would look like. Obviously, in February, we had the 2 further flood events. So what we have done is focused our review of the recovery action program on incorporating the February event with the July events. You'll note from the document that it does still have separate sections for both events, but also shows where there is some overlap, and has obviously now introduced some additional elements into that program, particularly around infrastructure recovery, which was not a large component of recovery from the July events, but obviously is a much bigger part of our recovery from the February events. So this document is presented to councillors today for their consideration and endorsement as the guiding document for how we progress through recovery over the coming months. It does also speak to the initial stages of an exit or a transition, if you like, over to business as usual as the recovery team and effort per se winds down, but some of these other programs wind up to take its place. Happy to take any questions on the program as presented.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Executive. Any questions, councillors, please? It's quite a large document. It's quite good actually to have it because it gives a good recap of everything that we've endured in terms of damage, and it's a good little snapshot of everything that's gone on. Councillor Bougen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just, I note reading it that we've really got details on the major flood events that have occurred, and I'm talking about in the Untitled area. But can I just seek assurance from Ms. Townrow that that all of the flood damage areas that have been noted in the Untitled are still continue to be taken forward and haven't slipped off the list? Thank you.
Absolutely. Councillor Bougen, that's an excellent question. The Recovery Action Program reports on activities at a program or a higher level. So particularly when we talk about the infrastructure repair, and I believe you'll be referring to, in particular, the riverbank erosion near the campground from the July event, and then also from the February event, the damage that occurred to the landfill site in Reefton. Those two things I can assure you are absolutely included in the infrastructure recovery program that has been worked up. And so when we look at the recovery action program, we talk about that as an infrastructure recovery, broad level encompassing all those projects which fit underneath, which certainly do include those in Reefton and in Karamea and what's happened in Granite, etc. So it is very much the breadth of the district, not just Westport. And we haven't in this document reported down to that individual project level, because this is the higher order document that overarches the recovery. But yes, I can assure you that they are absolutely still on the agenda and being progressed.
Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Sampson.
Along the same lines, I was going to ask some of those questions, but then it comes back to the community. And on page 81, that it also states that closely connected with the community for the consultation, community engagement with the Westport community. And I really, I think it should be changed from Westport community, because it's the whole district. If that, well, I sincerely hope that is the case, and what you were indicating was right. But as far as communication goes, I think that all the Buller district community, or those affected, should be communicated with, not closely connected with the Westport community.
Deputy CE.
Thank you, Councillor Sampson. That's an excellent pickup, and what that is simply a carryover from adapting the previous document into the new document, and we've not noticed that specific reference to Westport. That should absolutely be amended to reference district-wide. And again, I can assure you that in conversations with the comms team around recovery, that they are actively seeking opportunities through the likes of the Chronicle, the Clarion, looking at ways that we can get reach into those other communities, because very much recognising this is not just about Westport, that these events have impacted district-wide, and how we can make sure we're connecting with everybody, not just Westport. So thank you. We will get that changed in the document. That should say not Westport.
And they're still impacting, so I just don't want them to drop off completely. Yeah.
Thank you. Neither do we.
Thank you. Good catch. Okay. Any other questions on the flood recovery action program? Someone would like to move that be received. Councillor John Bowden, seconded Councillor Joe Howard. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Are there any against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay. Agenda item 7 is the property rationalisation project. Do you want to speak to it?
I can introduce it. I might need to assist with some of it.
Yep. Okay, so I'll go to Shelley Jobe, Acting Group Manager, Community Services, for just to talk us through the paper, and then we'll open it to further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in today's report, we have put forward the next 6 properties that we have identified as potential sales as part of the property rationalisation project. 3 of those properties are in Westport, 3 of those properties are in Reefton. And we have also been working towards seeking legal advice on the first properties that were brought to you in the tranche 1 group.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Howard, you have your hand up.
In the recommendations, it's got noted that it's one of the properties is 76 Buller Road, but the map is for 76A. And given it's a back section, I assume it should read 76A Buller Road. Could that be clarified?
So there are 3 properties in that area, and there is 1 property that we have yet to confirm clear ownership of. So we have not put that in as part of the report. 2 of them are clearly owned by Water District Council. 1 of them is not.
Doesn't quite answer my question. Is it meant to, given that we've been given a map with 76A on it, which property are we actually proposing to put up for disposal? Is it 76 or 76A? Or should it be both?
So that's page 100 of our diligent.
I can answer that if you don't mind. It's 76A, which is the boot-shaped one with the back section, and 74 is the little one to the left. The middle property, the smaller one, is the one that they can't find ownership on.
Okay.
So 70, as it says in the document, 76A and 74.
So noting then, Councillor Howard's point is that in the recommendations 1F should read 76A Buller Road. Is that your understanding, Councillor Bowden?
That is correct, yes.
So that's just a correction.
Sorry, I hadn't seen it there.
Yeah, that was all. Yeah. You comfortable with that?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Deputy Mayor Roach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just with regard to that same property, or those ones in that area, so 74 and 76A, I note that on page 100 it talks about these properties being used by the Pony Club, and this is probably a question that either Shelley or the Ngangahua Ward councillors can give a bit of background on. Is that whole area used by the Pony Club? And do you think, I'm just thinking of the public interest around this, if we agree to say it's for sale, is it a bit similar to like the Percy's Bush section in Westport, where we could get a lot of community interest in it? I just need a bit of an idea of before I vote to proceed with potentially selling it, just a bit of background around it, please.
So the lease currently sits with the subcommittee, not with the Buller District Council. There is an area of that which we cannot find a lease agreement with the Reef Pony Club for, and we have identified that there will be some public interest and public consultation perhaps around that because of the usage of the area.
Okay. Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Hawes because I think he's probably got some inside knowledge.
Yeah, all right. So look, I was there, a member of the Pony Club at that stage, and when they came into ownership of Buller District Council, I see that it says there that sale from Landcorp on part of it, but that's not my understanding for at least 2 of the sections. 2 of the sections, I believe, were a rating sale owned by a person, Bob Hyde, and then they were put up for a rating sale and they were withdrawn, and supposedly those properties were supposed to have been added to the Pony Club Reserve. So that was the understanding of the Pony Club at the time, that the sections were cleared, developed and added into the Pony Club Reserve. So I'm owing to the fact that we've had no discussion with the Pony Club, who have maintained, developed, etc., and used those in the preceding time, I'm extremely reluctant to vote. I'll be voting against the sale proceeding because I think that we've leapt a whole stage in the process here, and I think there are some other things which John is exploring that probably need to be added into that process as well. So I honestly think that those sections there going up, it's a premature process. It doesn't quite add up with my very intimate knowledge of it through that process at the time, because I was involved. And the understanding with the Buller District Council of what was supposed to happen to those sections, i.e. being added into the reserve, that was the understanding of the Pony Club at the time. So I think there's some things that need to be teased out there before this does, before we vote to move them to a sale process, basically.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Roach, further question?
No, that's very helpful. So just to pick up on one point there from Councillor Hawes, if I've picked this up right, are you saying that they being the Pony Club maintain all of that ground at the moment so that they mow it and keep it tidy? It's not a reserve that we being Buller District Council maintain. Okay,
No,
that's really helpful information. Thank
That's
you.
absolutely correct, but also it is the only sports reserve that is owned in Reefton by council. We don't have a Victoria Square or any of the rugby fields, or any other sporting reserves as a council and council ownership here in Reefton. That's it. So you're talking, it's council reserve. That's the only sporting reserve.
Rightio, thank you. I'll just, before I go to you, JB, can we get any clarity, Rachel, on?
I'd just like to add that it's not, the land isn't designated reserve, it's listed as fee simple, so I'm not sure how that would work in terms of calling it a reserve per se.
We can take those ones off the table and do a bit of follow-up information.
Yeah, okay, I'll just go to JB. Sorry, Councillor Bougen.
Thank you. So a couple of points to make here is that the Pony Club have made a sizable investment in their reserve, and that reserve is as Shelley said, comes under the Domain Board, and the Domain Board is now all resigned. So we're in a state of flux as to the ownership of it or the management of it. The Pony Club have been trotting along for the last 20 whatever years and
50 something
or 50 years. They've built a huge shed on there. It's got toilets, it's got power, it's got the whole fruit. And those sections there are used at their events for parking and so forth. So the big issue here is this is not a matter of just them keeping going with what they've got at the moment. I think we need to look at even looking at alternatives as to a location for the Pony Club as a whole, and also have a discussion, as Dave said, in terms of can they operate within reduced area, given the sizable investment and the long-term commitment. So I'm not saying don't sell it. I'm saying let's just pull it from the schedule at the moment and put it into round 3, and let's have a chat to vested interests in the meantime. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bougen. I think that's my feeling as well. There's no need to rush those ones through. There's clearly a bit of a discussion to be had there, and it may well be that council's appetite is to add it to the reserve, similar as what we're talking about with the Percy's Bush discussion. So certainly, the fact it's not reserved now doesn't mean that it can't be made reserve if that's what council desires, I would imagine. Any other questions on where we're at with this? So I will be proposing that when we get to the recommendations, we'll be removing E and F. Is it? I'll just check. Is it okay to remove and not direct?
Yes.
Separately. Okay. Cool. Councillor Sampson.
Can I sort of have some clarity why or even moving got the resolution number 1 when we haven't, and this has sort of identified some of the reason for the fact that we haven't got legal opinion. So why are we actually approving this subject to legal? Shouldn't this whole thing come back when under recommendation 3, that when we've got the information, this is when the report should come? Because I feel that I don't want to turn around and go ahead, say, yeah, we can go ahead and sell subject to legal opinion because of, well, just it's proven now of what has just been said, that we haven't got clarity, and if we'd had legal opinion beforehand, this probably would have come to light. So it's sort of the cart before the horse.
Okay, I'll go to Deputy Chief Executive Town Row.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Sampson. It is a It is a good question, and it's an interesting process question in relation to this project. And I think, you know, you've rightly pointed out that actually the conversation we've just had is exactly why staff have taken this approach to this project. If we had commissioned legal advice on these properties, what it would have told us is that these are freehold properties in Reefton with no impediment to their sale. It would not have picked up the history, the previous council decision, or, you know, that this would become part of the reserve. So in that situation, we would have expended the time and also expended some money on taking that advice without having had this conversation. So appreciating that it's difficult for councillors to make a final decision before having all of the advice in front of them, what these resolutions are seeking to do is to have these conversations now and to tease out any reasons, be they strategic, be they because of historic agreements, be they otherwise, that staff wouldn't proceed to do further due diligence and seek further advice on these properties, to then either come back to council for a further resolution if it brings something up, or if some of them are quite clear cut, then to enable that process to proceed smoothly. So that the point is absolutely taken, and that is the reason for doing it in this order, is first of all to test it, to see if there are any showstoppers in relation to these properties, and in the case of Buller Road we've found some potentially, to better direct staff to take those next steps forward, which do involve more resource.
Answer your question, Councillor Sampson.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions on the property rationalisation paper? Okay, so we will be amending recommendation 1, which is to instruct the Chief Executive Officer to proceed with the process of disposal of the following council-owned properties subject to legal advice. A, 153A Queen Street, with the legal description there. B, 18 Mill Street. C, 99 Russell Street. And D, Plaskett Street. Was there no number for that kind of thing? And so we are deleting E and F from this recommendation. Let's just deal with that one. Just check there's no additional.
No, I couldn't find them.
Okay. So as read, deletion of E and F. I'm moving that way. Seconder, please. Seconded, Councillor Dave Hawes. Any further discussion? Everyone clear on what we moved there? All those in favour? Any against? Just Councillor Sampson. I got that correct. So note, the motion is carried, noting Councillor Sampson in opposition. Okay, second recommendation notes progress made on issues raised in regard to some of the Group 1 properties at the council meeting on the 30th of March 2022. So it's just noting those updates. Okay, we've got some hands up on that one. Let's go to Deputy Mayor Roach, then Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 91, which is in relation to these properties that were brought to our last meeting, at C, it says around 84 Demet Street and 50 Bentham Street that advice from the real estate agent engaged by council is expected soon, and a verbal update will be given at the council meeting. So I guess I'm looking for that verbal update, please.
This is in regards to the forming of the road, Councillor Roach?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Well, not necessarily forming of the road, but the information that was to be coming around that in general terms. Yep.
Yep, thank you. We did receive some information from the real estate agent, but unfortunately it didn't answer our initial question around whether sealing the road would be of benefit and or increase the value of the property. So I am still trying to make contact with the real estate agent on that.
So we'll, just to confirm then, we'll be updated at the next meeting when we get the next lot of information through on the property rationalisation. Thank you.
It's a work in progress. Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, as both recommendations 2 and 3 infer that there is further work to be done and further information to come back to full council, I'm happy to move both of those recommendations.
Thank you, councillor. Does anyone else wish to second those? So we're now talking recommendations 2 and 3. Councillor Weston. Okay, so I will read them out. So we've coupled them together and I'll just check there's no further discussion required. So we are noting resolution 2, notes progress made on issues raised in regard to some of the Group 1 properties at the council meeting on 30th of March 2022. And 3, instruct the Chief Executive to report back to council on the outcome of the advice sought on the Group 1 properties. So that's moved. Councillor Rutherford, seconded. Councillor Weston. Any further questions or discussion? Okay, all those in favour? Are there any against? No, so that's carried unanimous. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 8 is the Mokihinui water supply and Little Wanganui wastewater. Where are we? Now this has been prepared by Rod. Rod, Mr. Fox, are you able to talk us through this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are a couple of items that were supposed to have been raised late last year, and because of the pressing nature of them, have been brought forward now rather than wait till the next or till the submissions. The Mokihinui water supply, the pump and the roading was supposedly allowed for in the rating, so they've been counted in this annual plan, but we do require the retrospective approval of the 5,000, and the second issue being the track to help access to the site, which supposedly or apparently the current track is quite dangerous, and so to make ease of access, they propose this new track with the landowner's approval. The second one, the Little Wanganui wastewater supply. My understanding is at the time of the establishment, or perhaps it's come out subsequently, that the development was made but may have got into challenges. Councillor Sampson, you may have more information on that or more knowledge of it than I do, but that we took over the subdivision and were left with some undertakings which included connecting, as we've asked to do here. And at this stage there are 6 connections waiting to be done, and they have been waiting some time.
Thanks, Mr. Fox. Councillor Sampson, your hand is up first.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of knowledge because, believe it or not, it goes back before my time, and I think it's been established probably about 1970, my time on council. About in the 70s, I think, and I think the subdivision got into strife, and it would have been the county council at the time took it over. So I'm not sure what the whole situation sort of is, because you know, the report's somewhat lacking. It doesn't tell us how many connections are there, how many. I think you've just alluded to another 9 connections, was it?
6, Councillor.
6.
Well, that's what's been asked at present anyway.
And are there going to be any more? And why are we paying for it? Shouldn't it be coming out of the targeted rates? But I don't see that we should be paying for the connection. It should be the people. Are the connections not on site?
Not to the boundary anyway. So we're paying for the connections through to the boundary itself, and the reasons why we're doing it is apparently tied up back in that state when they were taken over. My thoughts for it would, sorry, Councillor.
Well, if you haven't got the documentation to say that we're responsible to do it, well, why are we doing it?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure that we don't have the documentation, Councillor, just that it's somewhere in the archives. It would take some time to be dug out, but my understanding from Wade is that we are responsible for it.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Fox. So presumably this amount of money you're talking here will be included in the, or the servicing of that debt will be included in the targeted rate that's applied to the connected people now, and over time, the more people connected to it, ultimately assists really in the spreading of the load.
Yes, and Mr. Chair, I would be making a recommendation to infrastructure that they actually go and see how many lots are on that subdivision and start making provision for it going forward, and perhaps the extensional plan.
Yeah, thank you.
But I would have to question whether the people that are already connected are willing to pay for others to come on. The cost of others coming onto the scheme, sure, their rate should be lowered, but it's a cost that they've been paying for quite some time, and it's a capital cost. It's not for the operational cost, which is probably one of the biggest in the district. It's quite exorbitant because, again, a low number of people. And probably 12 months ago, we spoke about, well, last annual plan about connecting or dumping a freedom camping refuge, dumping the waste there. And it was said, well, it may not have enough capacity. So, as I said, this report's really, really wanting, because it's not telling us how many connections, the cost, and whether you've got the capacity for more connections.
Mr. Fox.
Councillor Sampson, all I can relay is that Wade has asked for the connections, and I'm presuming he's done that on the basis that there is capacity. And as to the costs, I'm not sure how they're distributed otherwise, but the rating at this stage would appear to cost them about, over the ratepayers, they're about $21 a year.
Okay, it would have been good to have a report explaining that. If Wade's got the knowledge, we certainly don't.
I appreciate that.
There's a few things in there. I will go to you in a minute, Councillor Howard. But I mean, this isn't dissimilar to any other reticulated sewage scheme that council has, in which we would provide the connection to the boundary, and the people already connected to it help fund that. I mean, that's what happens in Westport, isn't it? And I'm presuming in Reefton is that it becomes part of the targeted rate group. That's exactly what happens. So, and that funds capital and OPEX and everything. That's just part of council's obligations. If assuming we do have the obligation, which apparently we do, then it's no different to any other reticulated scheme we have. And with regards to the dumping of motorhome waste, it's a totally different scenario than the timed load that you get with a reticulated supply, where the solids are being introduced, gradually over the period of 24 hours, versus going and dumping a week's worth in the hole at any one time. It's quite a different loading scenario. So not all schemes are designed to handle that. Councillor Howard.
I had fielded several questions to staff yesterday, several of which I have had replies, thank you. One was providing a map outlining the areas and where it'd be, and defining what the official infrastructure is going to be. Like clarified, it was going to be the connections to the properties. I still would desire a little bit more history. What's our obligations? It was obviously to do connections for a defined subdivision area. We're proposing to do 6 connections, but how many other undeveloped sections are there? What's our future commitments? But my big concern is under the TTPP proposed scheme, this is under a hazard overlay, and that proposal is that there's no new builds within this area. So I wonder, we're putting an infrastructure for 80 years. Have these people already got consent to build, or are we actually going to provide a connection where no one's going to be able to build anyway, so it's sort of sunk cost? So is that bit of a timing between, have these people got consent, will they be granted consent? I know it's a bit hard when the TTPP is not approved, so it's a bit of a future gazing, but I'm just got real concern about putting 80-year infrastructure and the cost to the other people that are there and have got existing use rights. Where all this fits, I feel uneasy about the whole thing with the information that I have. I think you've answered my question about Mokihinui, although I do wonder who's going to maintain the road. Obviously, it's beneficial to the landowner. What sort of costs are going to be incurred in this road, not understanding its length or standards. So just about to be reassured that's not going to be an ongoing high cost to the other targeted ratepayers.
Deputy CE has indicated she has an answer to the first part of the question anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you certainly raised some good points there, Councillor Howard, which will be picked up through the operational matters relating to the Little Wanganui connection. So, councillors, what we're talking about here is what we currently have on the table are 6 requests from community members for connections into an existing scheme on the basis of a previous decision of council that council would meet the cost of getting those connections to those boundaries. Those 6 people will have to work through the building consent process, any resource consent process, any district plan rules and regulations as they currently apply today, because those are simply the only rules that we can apply. Well, I take your point about the TTPP and future looking. In terms of that regulatory process, we are really stuck with applying what exists at the time people make their application. So what is in front of you simply relates to those 6 people who over the past months have come to council and said, please would you do what it is you've said you will do, and they will have to work through those other processes. In terms of then how many future connections might there be, is this a sensible place to be putting in connections, etc. They become conversations for the annual plan, for the TTPP, etc. So certainly this has flagged for us that this will come up. As I understand it, talking to staff, there hadn't been a lot of interest in the Little Wanganui subdivision over a number of years, and then just in very recent times that interest has become particularly heightened, which is what has now brought this topic to the fore, because we are now having people come forward saying, I'm going to build in the Little Wanganui subdivision, please will you connect me to infrastructure. So now that we have that flag, we can certainly look at what that means for the future with some annual plan decisions and TTPP, etc. But this decision right now is about the 6 requests for connection we currently have on the table, which had not been budgeted for in the long-term plan because they were not anticipated.
Thank you. Right, I've got 4 hands up. I will park you for a bit, Councillor Sampson. You've had a couple of minutes and we'll come back to you. I'll go to Deputy Mayor Roach, then Councillor Weston, then Mr. Boucher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Deputy CE's comments raise a question for me, and that's around rating for this. So if there is a connection to the boundary and we have an obligation to do that, have no problem with that. What if under any rules that come along, whether it be subject to the TTPP or whatever, or building, people can't end up building there? Are they subject to, say, half a rate for a connection going past their boundary, like as there are for many others in our district? So it would be good to understand that. Otherwise, we're potentially imposing, as I think Councillor Howard has suggested, we're potentially imposing a rate on the ones that are already connected there if the buildings never go ahead. So I'd like to know, would we be rating for half because it goes to their boundary or past their boundary, or what's the rules out there, please?
Okay, Deputy CE.
Excellent question, Deputy Mayor Roach. That would be a decision of council through rating policy, either through the annual plan or the long-term plan process. So it's through that process that those decisions are set about whether people are rated fully or half or not at all for connections going past their property, is my understanding. So that would become a decision for council at the time. And off the top of my head, I can't tell you how that currently sits in our policy.
So it varies currently across schemes, but I don't know
Right.
I don't know if Mike, do you have any idea what the particular rule is in Little Wanganui?
Mr. Mayor, we'd have to check, but it'd be an easy check.
Okay. I'd really like to understand that, because that could be quite, have some bearing on a decision. I understand you probably won't be able to get that right now, but maybe that just shows that we need a little bit more information. Thank you.
Councillor Weston?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Further to Councillor Howard's comments about hazards and stuff, when Mr. Tonetti and his cohorts first initiated this subdivision out there, the hazard itself wasn't coastal, but from the slip behind the subdivision itself. So I think they sort of washed their hands of it at that stage, and that's probably one of the reasons why it went to council. So I'd be interested to find out whether it went to council before amalgamation or after amalgamation.
So thank you through the chair. I understand that it came to council prior to amalgamation, but I'm not 100% certain on that. We could find out.
I'll go to Councillor Bougen or Hawes, whichever one it is.
Yeah, it's Councillor Hawes. My question partially been asked by Deputy Mayor Roach, but so the way I saw this was that you've got two processes. One is a building consent, resource consent process, separate aside from what we're talking about here, which is a connection that we've obviously committed to in the past. And I'm pretty sure, from my understanding, this is pre-amalgamation. It was Bulla County Council, because I'm pretty sure Max Alley was the county clerk at the time when that happened. Kilkenny subdivision, wasn't it? I'm pretty sure. Anyway, all that aside, what separating the two processes out? Well, it's not here for us to discuss whether or not that there's a hazard and they're going to have to meet certain things for building requirements. That's aside. What is here is the connection, and I heard from acting CEO Rachel Townrow that it's our decision as to whether we make a full charge, a half charge, or no charge for travelling past the gate. Well, I'd be comfortable to go ahead with this, as long as if we go ahead and put in a full charge. It's been requested that they do this. There's a cost involved. It impacts on other ratepayers in that area, but it impacts positively if they pay a full connection rate. And I think that that's probably how I'd be more comfortable making the decision around a full connection rate. We'll go ahead and put this in if you're prepared to pay, and we'll make the proviso that you pay the full connection rate. And then it's a fait accompli, basically. So that's how I see it. So if it is a separate process that we have to go through to make that decision, then I'm more comfortable making that decision at the same time around doing the connection and charging the full rate.
Thank you. Councillor Sampson, and then we'll go to Councillor Nah.
I'm not against, well, I'm really in favour of the connections, but it's just, it comes back to who pays and whether the other people that are already connected are happy to be paying for somebody else to come on the scheme. So I'm going along with Dave on that one, that pay full connection fee straight away, but it would have been good if we knew that the other people connected to the scheme had been consulted. And just while I've got the floor, on recommendation number 2, going back to the Mokihinui, I understood that it was said just a minute ago that wanted to put a track in, but the resolution is to approve establishing an easement. Do we not have the easement for that at the moment? So that's something you can address later, but if we haven't even got an easement, we have to get the easement before we do anything else.
The recommendation speaks to that, so it's an easement and track.
The cost of establishing an easement.
Yeah.
Well, isn't
that what you're asking? So they have to establish an easement and the track.
Establish the easement first, yeah. Right.
Yeah. Councillor Nah.
So I would just like to say that there was a massive court case about the Wanganui subdivision a long time ago. I don't remember what it was all about. They wanted to build there and council said no and they won. But going back to these connections, you cannot now turn around and tell people that they've got to pay for them when all the other people that live there haven't had to pay for theirs. And I think best we look at the history of how that came about before we start making ad hoc decisions today that we must charge these people to now connect. So a little bit of history perhaps need to be looked in, and I just think we've been asked to approve that the connections be made, the money be made available, and I think we should just get on with it and then do that, look at the rest of the history in the background so we know why.
Thanks, Councillor Nah. Right, to just try and I think the first two are okay, and my view on the wastewater system is I don't think that the Little Wanganui issue, I don't think it should be treated any different than any other closed account wastewater system, in which case the council provides the connection to the gate, and the group, everyone connected to it, contributes to the cost of that, and that deals with the historic matters. In my view, because that's by connecting to the reticulation, you're connecting to the collective, unless council policy changes to something different, where we no longer require the targeted rate. Councillor Rutherford, and then I'm going to wrap this one up.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I totally concur with what you've said, and councillors Hawes and Sampson. Look, I believe they're asking us to approve an unbudgeted amount of 25,000 to proceed with this work. I'm very comfortable that we do that, and the rating implications of that can be looked into and dealt with at the time. Clearly, we do have some accountability, responsibility in this matter, or it wouldn't have been raised in the paper otherwise. So I'm perfectly happy that we go ahead and facilitate the work, sort the rating implications out.
Thanks, Councillor Rutherford. I'll just quickly go to Mr. Duff, then back to you, Deputy Mayor, and then we're going to vote on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just an update looking at the 2021 LTP, and perhaps the draft annual plan is consistent with this, that for Little Wanganui, there is a full rate for connected and a half rate for serviceable, which we'd have to look at what the exact definition of that is, but I understand it's as it goes past the property. So that's what our current FIS states with regard to that sewage scheme. And just quickly on Mokihinui water supply, from an operational perspective, where this request has come from, is essentially just to ensure, well, in the case of the pump, that service level can continue, and with respect to easement and track is really to support ongoing maintenance and R&M. So they're really driven from an operational perspective. I understood this paper, however, was more to do with the financial implications of not having budget set aside, and perhaps the rating implications would have been useful, but that was just some contribution. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Duff. I see, Deputy, your hand has gone down. I take it that answer has largely dealt with your concerns there. Okay, so let's move to the recommendations. I'm not sure why the numbers just carry on to 4, so, but anyway, it's in the paper as 4.
It's not. So
should we renumber them as 1?
Yes, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, it's in my thing here as 1. Okay. So recommendation 1 is approve in retrospect the unexpected cost of the replacement of a supply pump at $5,000, and that is for Mokihinui, isn't it? It's not actually listed in there.
Yes, correct.
For the Mokihinui.
I'm happy to move 1 to 3.
Cool. I mean, thank you, Councillor Sampson. Do I have a seconder then? And then I'll read them out. Councillor Bougen, seconded, thank you. Okay, and the second one is that we approve the unbudgeted cost of establishing an easement and track to the Mokihinui water supply at $20,000. And 3, approve the unbudgeted cost of establishing connections to the Little Wanganui wastewater system at $25,000. So that has been moved. Councillor Sampson, seconded. Councillor Bougen. I see Councillor Howard has her hand up. So we'll just, any questions on that, Councillor Howard?
Just a minute of clarification, because when I put the questions to staff, they said they've allowed for the Mokihinui water supply in the proposed next year's annual plan, but the Wanganui wastewater system hadn't been put forward into next year's annual plan process. So when we're clarifying the approval of a budget, just what particular budget we're actually approving. This one approving the expense, but one hasn't actually been put forward for next year's budget plan as a carry forward. So just a bit of clarity around that in the resolution.
Thank you. That's Mr. Fox's department, please.
My understanding is that this paper was to come earlier in the year, late last year, and that they had allowed for it in the annual plan for this year. That's the rating for the Mokihinui scheme. If that was the question, Councillor Howard.
Thank you. So you're telling me it's effectively included in the current rate because they were anticipating this paper having already been to council?
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Can I speak to that?
Yep.
We need to amend 3 because that doesn't allow for it in the proposed annual plan, and an indicator figure given was $20.99 exclusive of GST, just as a ballpark figure. So I feel that has to be added to the recommendation.
I'm not clear what you mean.
That the implications of these 6 new connections and the cost will in effect mean that the targeted rate for the Little Wanganui will go up approximately $21 exclusive GST in the next year's annual plan process, which is not published at the moment in the draft. Am I correct?
We can't add that to this resolution because that's an annual plan decision. So that will come through as there'll have to be, or it'll be late now, I guess, a change to whatever the fees and charges side of the annual plan will be. Yeah. So if a change is needed to what's gone out in the draft, it should come through as a staff submission that there needs to be a correction, if you like, to the stated figure in the draft annual plan before it's approved. It wouldn't be part of this. It wouldn't be done on the fly in this resolution. I wouldn't think. That's according to staff advice. Mr. Fox.
Sorry, just with those figures, Councillor Howard, they were given a scenario, and it does depend on the CapEx and the OpEx costs. So it was only an indicative figure.
So will be picked up through the annual plan process.
Yep. So it will be picked up through the annual plan process, I'm assured. Mr. Duff, you still have your hand up. Are you got something further to add, or just?
My apologies, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. No problem. Go to the back of the class. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. If there's no further questions, all those in favour of 1 through 3? Any against? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Good discussion note. Another legacy issue of BDC. Okay.
Trying to fix it.
Yes. Right, the Chief Executive Officer's report, which will be handled by the Deputy Chief Executive Officer, acting as the real Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. And thank you, councillors. The report for this month is largely focused on central government reform, which we have recently been updated of some changes in their programme. It talks firstly to the Resource Management Act reform timeline, which, as you'll see from the report, has been pushed back a little bit, giving some additional time for input and engagement, also meaning, though, that these changes will not be implemented at the times originally thought. This links into news we've had just today about the Climate Change Adaptation Plan, which has just been announced today, which also picks up on some of these changes coming through in the Resource Management Act, particularly in the adaptation and managed retreat space. So this is something we are very much keeping a watchful eye on, and we'll be looking to bring opportunities through for engagement, and certainly keen to be actively engaged with this reform process because it is quite significant for New Zealand as a whole, as well as for Bulla. Civil Defence Emergency Management Amendment work. This is also being picked up through the climate adaptation work that's been announced today. There is a rather large reform program going on around civil defence emergency management. Obviously, this is something to the fore for Bulla at the moment on the back of our flooding events, and this is an area we've been doing a lot of work in. And another one where we will be looking to engage and share some of those experiences and some of the learnings we've picked up working with the CDM Act recently. I'd like to acknowledge the work that Minister Allen and her officials have been doing, getting around making sure that mayors and chief executives and technical staff in these early stages are across what these reforms are proposing and really engaging and helping with that understanding and wanting to listen and hear what people have to say. Also recently announced, and it does all link in to that broader package, is the New Zealand Biodiversity Strategy Implementation Plan. This is more fundamentally linked to regional councils, but will also have some links with district councils and ties in with some of the work we've been doing, particularly around our economic development strategy, the environmental improvement and prosperity strategy, our work with the Tahitanga Tile Alliance, with the Poutini Polytechnic, etc., and some of the work we're looking to bring forward around the Three Waters reform, better off funding. So just this is a relatively new as well as implementation plan, so just flagging for councillors that it is now there, and we will look to see what implications that will have and also what opportunities that will present for Bulla. Picking up on a conversation at the Finance Risk and Audit Committee meeting last week around the report from the Project and Partnership meeting, and just noting for councillors that the report you see in the Finance Risk and Audit Committee meeting is simply the report that has gone to the Projects and Partnerships meeting the week or two beforehand. So where it flags that there is to be a verbal update on projects, what that is indicating is the Projects and Partnerships Committee received a verbal update on those projects, not that staff were intending to bring that verbal update through the Finance Risk and Audit Committee, but also note that there is some interest from councillors on what those verbal updates may well have been. As I said at the time of FRAC, my apologies, I was not in the Projects and Partnership meeting, so couldn't give you an update at that time on what had been said in those meetings. But in a summary, in terms of the Bulla planting project, which is one which received a verbal update, that project has generally been on a bit of a wind down phase because staff have been redeployed into other works, and also because the budget was largely expended and they were actually looking to exit that program and just doing some final pieces of work around that. So we're expecting to see that wrap up and finish reporting on the Bulla planting project reasonably shortly. In terms of district revitalisation, the next Project and Partnership Committee meeting, which I believe is in a fortnight's time, we'll be receiving an updated written report on district revitalisation projects, and which in particular will look to close out some of the projects we have in relation to that. So the verbal update was simply to say that in subsequent months there will be a more detailed report closing out the district revitalisation projects. Similarly with the various water supplies, where a verbal report was indicated. For Waimangaroa, you've had the updated report on this council agenda. And for the others, again, it was just flagging that further written reports would be coming. So unless the Mayor has anything to add from Projects and Partnership meeting
No, I didn't say.
about those verbal updates, you know, in essence, it wasn't that anything was missed from councillors, but anything was being kept in that FRAC agenda. It was simply a copy and paste of a report from another meeting where verbal updates were presented. I'm happy to take any questions on the
Any
report.
questions on the overall CE report, please? Councillor Howard.
Just a bit of a question around the wording. On page 114, under Council develops a climate change strategy, the wording says that given the flood and COVID lockdown, anticipate moving commencements of the strategy into early 2023. But I sort of see it as we're starting already and doing a lot of that background work, and whether for the public thinking may read and think we just put that whole climate change strategy and action plan in the background, was really was started on that work. So a bit of rewording maybe, or clarification.
So you're talking the KPIs there. So they're agreed at the start of, so that they were the wording in the bit in dark. Is that what you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about here. So if I may, through the
Okay.
chair, I thank you, Councillor Howard. I do take the point there, and I think if we read those sentences sort of sequentially moving down the page, and that gets updated as you move down those paragraphs, what that is flagging is that the work that's done to date is not writing the strategy per se. It is the background work to be done building up to the writing of the strategy. But you are absolutely correct that that background work is underway, and yes, we could be flagging for the community and in this KPI reporting that actually the work is underway on the strategy because the research in the background is happening. So happy to take that forward as a shift in that wording.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I understand what you mean now. Yeah, so those panels are, each paragraph is the next update, if you like, from top to bottom in terms of each particular KPI that we're commenting on. So that's what comes through each month. Thank you. Okay, nothing else on questions for the CE report. Can somebody move that we receive that, please? Councillor Weston, seconded. Councillor Deputy Mayor Roach. All those in favour? Any against? That's carried unanimous. Thank you. Right, agenda item 10, Mayor's report. Look, I'm going to take that as read today. That's quite a bit in there of what I've been up to. The only thing I'd comment on is Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. Again, the program is going really, really well. But I think just it's not a given that the government will continue to fund that program into the next financial year. So there's certainly work underway at Mayor's Task Force for Jobs HQ and the MSD officials in Wellington around whether or not they can get a successful budget bid to include MTFJ for the 22-23 year going out. So that's not locked in yet. It's certainly a topic of discussion in Wellington though. But what I have been assured or have been interested, is that there will be some funding at a regional level along to achieve similar outcomes. So exactly what that looks like or whether or not we need to go that way will depend on the outcome of the national discussion. So that's MTFJ. Meral relief, that's all pretty self-explanatory. So I don't think anything else I really need to comment there. I'll just ask for any questions. Councillor Weston.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to make a comment on Joe Seddon's reply to the internet and outage about them, of course, not supplying mobile and fixed wire stuff. I think what people got to realise is all your internet, all your mobile, all your 800 numbers travel throughout the district on Chorus Fibre. So that's how fragile it is. So from Karamea right through to Greymouth, and it only takes one break. So that's what I think, they raised those concerns and I think they're quite valid.
Yeah, thank you. I think the key point that came out of the reply, which I have shared with the original Karamea Medical Centre person, that people need to complain to their service provider around outages. So if that's your Vodafones or your Sparks or whoever's actually to get these faults logged, because as her reply was in terms of the Chorus network itself, there was limited actual outages. So maybe an issue with the individual company that supply the actual service. Any other questions on my report? Cool, thank you. Somebody move that way. Councillor Nah, seconded by Deputy Mayor Roach. All those in favour? Any against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Right, we'll go to the committee chairs' verbal updates. And first cab off the rank is ICB Councillor Bougen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Earlier this month, the first Tuesday of the month, we had the ICB meeting, community board meeting, and it's fair to say that it was a vigorous debate over the pedestrian crossing, which had been proposed. I'm pleased to announce that while the pedestrian crossing was not approved, and that was based on, it was a huge public gallery and not one was in favour of it for any number of reasons. But the positive to come out of it was that it's been clearly identified that the major issues are in fact the speed down Broadway, and with the recommendation that it can be reduced down to 30 Ks, that there's a speed monitor, one of those TV screens at the top of town, which hasn't worked since it was installed, that was suggested that someone should go and find a battery to put in it. And that we need to add a few more onto that, and that there are other greater things that needed doing in terms of pedestrian safety, such as the town bridge, which needs widening for pedestrian purposes. But also, it's heartening that council staff are now working on a swing bridge out at Blacks Point, so that anyone who is walking or even biking from Blacks Point into town doesn't have a near-death experience at every turn. So that's be marvellous if that was to come to pass. So it was great to see democracy in action. The other thing is that at the FREC meeting last week, I thought we had agreed that we'd get a verbal update on the water situation in Reefton. I note it's not in the agenda. So at some point it would be nice to receive some information on the current status. And as we're being asked this question on an almost daily basis now by our constituents. And other than that, it's all progressing well, and we look forward to the works being done or being completed on the flood walls and being finalised on the old rubbish dump. So Reefton remains in good heart. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bougen. What did you need to know about the Reefton water?
Well, at FRAC, it was supposed to be a verbal update, but there wasn't available. And it was agreed it was going to be put into this agenda for this meeting. And so it's not. So, but at some point, it would be nice to get a right up to the minute status on where it's all at, given that we are very close to the works being completed. Or not.
Okay. No, I realise now. So that was what Rachel was referring to. So they were verbal updates to projects in partnership. So I think you will get that full update at the next projects in partnership as the proper project report that will come through there.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll just check with Mr. Duff, but I think that'll be probably the best way to handle it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Absolutely. It'll be the closeout report alongside some of the other Three Waters projects that will go to the next steering committee PIP on, I think it's the 9th of May.
Yep, thank you. Right, any other questions for Councillor Bougen and his report? Nope, thank you. So we'll go to Ned Tulfley, Ngāti Waiwai. Do you have anything, Ned?
Nothing that relate directly to to the well, apart from the fact that I've been doing a bit of work around the other part of my job in terms of their Poutini mining, but quite a few of the folk involved with this project down here have been struck down with the COVID. So it's been quite an effort to trying to get things done, but we'll get there.
Yep.
That's me.
Thanks, Ned. Yeah, it's certainly having an impact on council and council laws. A number have now had the bug and have recovered, thankfully. So we'll carry on to Regulatory Hearings Committee. Councillor Rutherford, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, not a lot to report in this month. It's been business as usual for our regulatory department. There's been quite a bit of catch-up work required to be done. As everyone knows well, there was quite a bit of disruption to BAU for regulatory through the events. So it's been a settling down phase, if you like. And so outside of the work that we're doing in regard to climate change and adaptation, which you're all very well aware of, which is of course a big part of regulatory, I've got nothing really further to add at this point in time. I will say, and it was raised during our climate change workshop, that we're obviously aware that we could be facing some other submissions from our community in regards to what we are doing in regard to things like rubbish disposal, the burning of rubbish, etc., etc. And these will probably form part of some plan in terms of updating our bylaws. Our current bylaw for fires and open spaces don't really deal with these issues that have really only become modern issues, if you like, in regards to pollution and how we deal with those issues. So I expect we'll see a bit more activity in that regard in the ensuing months. So not a lot to add, but there may be questions.
Thanks, Councillor. Any questions? No, thank you. So we'll go to Community Environment Services Committee, noting Councillor Montgomery is an apology, but Councillor Howard has been attending a couple of things in relation to that broader portfolio. So I'll ask Councillor Howard to give us an update on a couple of things, please.
I've been the representative on the West Coast Housing Forum, which has had monthly Zoom meetings. On the 13th of April, some of the key topics that the forum's been covering is home ownership, specific how to get first home buyers into homes, encouraging development, so it's looking at a potential developers forum, and then looking at other support services around housing. So we have monthly updates on social housing throughout the region, and that comes from councils, which can be the pensioner housing as an example, Kiangaora, TAS, MIMBI, DHB. So we get a pretty broad coverage of what's happening in social housing and what the issues are. And I've been forwarding on those minute meetings to Margaret Montgomery as the chair, but can happily send them on to any other councillors as well. But that's what's going on in that sphere.
Right, thank you. Councillor Howard, any questions there from anyone? No, thank you very much. Poutini plan, Deputy Mayor Roach.
Nothing really to add there, Mr. Mayor. You've given a number of reports in your report. We do meet again on Friday. So we'll have another update after that, but it's just progressing. The team have been out and about doing the console drop-ins with the hazard overlays and so on. I think everyone's pretty much up to date with everything that's going on there. So we'll have another report for the next meeting, subject to the meeting with TTPP on Friday.
Thank you very much. Yes, the team have been out and about to the areas, various areas with the hazard stuff, and noting that the Westport one They were still awaiting the ability to answer some of the key questions that the Westport community had, and so those drop-ins for the Westport specific stuff were put off until that data would be available, which is potentially coming back in June. I understand, but that'll be a matter for the committee to discuss this week, I think, or next couple of weeks. Thank you. Okay, Joint Committee Rating District. So that's Councillor Rutherford, by the look of it. Yep, thanks.
Yeah, so thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, obviously you'll be aware that the draft minutes of the most recent meeting have not been made available for consideration by council. You will recall that our last full meeting, we had a copy of the minutes from the inaugural meeting. Look, suffice it to say, it's probably because the meeting was a bit delayed. It didn't take place until was it the 10th or the 11th of this month, so not that long ago. Really, I think it's been well traversed. The matters that were discussed in that meeting have been well traversed by the local media. I'm pretty sure you'll all be pretty familiar with the outcome of that meeting. There is our May one is scheduled for, I believe, the 4th. Is that right, Joe? You'll be aware of that. So that'll be next week, and that'll be interesting to see what the agenda, which hasn't been released to us yet, and what further matters will be discussed. But I guess Joe or I could probably give you some response if you have any questions about the activity generated from the last meeting.
Thanks, Councillor. Any questions? So I just will point out those minutes were chased up at this end, but they have been still working their way through the.
But as soon as we have them, we will.
Yeah, as soon as we have them, they'll come through council meeting. We want to keep that on our record as well, formal record. Councillor Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just a concern over a potential cut through the back of Snodgrass by the cemetery there. I was hoping that area would be left for an evacuation route if Westport needed to evacuate. It seems a strange place to put a cut through at the back of Snodgrass there.
So, Mr. Mayor, it's not a definite proposal at this stage. It's one of the options that's been raised by Land, River and Sea for consideration by Regional Council, as well as obviously the Joint Committee. But it is not a definite proposal at this stage. Clearly, Land, River and Sea do see it as a potential option for dealing with significant flood in the Orowaiti. And if you look at it in context of the option between doing that and a cut directly out to the sea, it certainly looks like the better option. But Joe may have a comment on that as well.
There was a whole raft of different other modelling things that are being undertaken, and I assume we'll have it at the next meeting, what those modelling bring up. But alongside that cut in the Snodgrass, they were also looking at the causeway, so they're looking at the exits out of Westport as part of that, both whether that constricts the flooding, but I assume that will also mean the height, and because part of this is the evacuation of Westport if it's needed, and that's taken into account. So at the last meeting, we had the updates on the emergency works, drainage and culvert report, land tenure update. So it's who owns the lands. It can take it's who owns the land where they're proposing the flood walls. The more modelling options that are being undertaken. Preparation of the business case to central government for funding support, and then district plan designations for the flood. So that's, and then once the build, who's responsible for them, who owns them, who pays, who rates for the costs, etc. So that was what was covered in the April the 11th one.
Yep, thank you, Councillor. Nothing further.
Yeah, can I just add in there that there is one other piece of potential work that was highlighted, and that is the work required around, the drainage and the stormwater, etc. And the big question mark is that's likely to be quite a significant cost in terms of the project itself, to ensure that once walls are designed, or whatever the final outcome is, that they actually work as per their design standards. And clearly stormwater and drainage are a key component. So quite a significant cost attached to that wasn't budgeted into the 10.9 million. And the question will be if and when this work goes ahead, and I'm sure it will be required, as to how it is funded and whether or not the future of the Westport rating district, it becomes included as a, if you like, stormwater and flood protection rating district, which could have quite implications for the ratepayers. So just a heads up around that as well.
Yep, thanks, Councillor. Okay, so there's no further questions. I will move that we accept those verbal updates 1 through 6. Somebody second that, please. Seconded, Councillor Nah. All those in favour? Any against? That's carried unanimously. Now, councillors, we now will be moving to public excluded, which we need to do in the live stream part of the meeting. And then I propose we have a 5-minute adjournment for a toilet break. Deputy, oh gosh, got hands up all over the place. Deputy Mayor Roach.
Just a reminder, Mr. Mayor, response to public forum.
Okay, thank you. So the public forum was in relation to the Waimangaroa water. So I think I can share the resolutions as passed and offer the reassurance or the advice around what we're asking for in recommendation 3 around the rating implications yet to come back to council. Is everybody happy with that response? On those lines, thank you. Councillor Weston.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think in Barry Lightbound's report, I think he makes a bit of a typo in naming Brian mum as opposed to it's Bruce mum. Brian is Bruce's dad, so I don't think Brian would be sorting out that. It would be Bruce mum that's been involved all along.
Oh, yeah, okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so with that, I'll note that that public forum is to be done. Okay, agenda item 12 is resolved that the public be excluded from the following parts of proceedings of this meeting. For item 14, utilities contract review procurement. Do I need to read that all out? I don't think I do. And for the discussion on the Senior Housing Macaulay Flats Trust Deed, to discuss the draft Chief Executive Officer KPIs and the Chief Executive Officer performance review process. Is there any, I'll move that way. Is there a seconder, please? Seconded, Councillor Hawes. Is there any discussion required on our reasons there? Nope. So all those in favour, please. Any against? So that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so we're now in public excluded. I will move that we have a recess for 5 minutes or so. So we'll come back at say 5 minutes to 5.